In the heart of a desolate, war-torn planet far from Earth's blue skies, humanity's finest soldiers trudged through alien terrain. The air was thick with an eerie silence that weighed heavily on their shoulders, broken only by the crunch of boots against jagged rocks and the distant hum of strange energy fields. Each step they took felt like it echoed into eternity, as if the universe itself were watching them intently. Among these soldiers stood Elias, a man hardened not just by battle but by loss. His face bore scars both visible and invisible, his eyes carrying the weight of countless missions gone wrong. He had been warned about this place, about what awaited them here. But no warning could have prepared him for what lay ahead. The mission briefing had been straightforward: infiltrate the alien stronghold, neutralize the Queen, and secure vital intel to turn the tide in humanity's favor. Command had called her the most dangerous entity known to mankind, painting her as some monstrous tyrant hell-bent on destruction. They spoke of her with fear-laden voices, describing her power over armies of creatures loyal to her every whim. Yet, despite all the stories, Elias couldn't shake off a nagging sense of unease. Something about the way they described her didn't sit right. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, almost primal. Elias glanced around at his team, each one brimming with nervous energy. Some clutched their weapons tighter than usual, while others whispered prayers under their breaths or muttered curses when no one was looking. Everyone knew how high the stakes were. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was survival. Their armor gleamed dully under the dim light of two suns hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The atmosphere crackled with tension, anticipation, and dread, all swirling together like storm clouds before lightning strikes. As they moved closer to the towering spires of the alien fortress, its silhouette sharp against the horizon, Elias found himself questioning everything he thought he knew. Was she really the monster they claimed? Or was there more to her story, buried beneath layers of propaganda and fear-mongering? Whatever awaited them inside those walls, Elias understood one thing clearly: nothing would ever be the same again after this day. The fortress loomed larger with every cautious step forward, its architecture unlike anything human hands could create. Towering structures spiraled upward like frozen tendrils of smoke, pulsating faintly with bioluminescent hues that seemed alive. The closer they approached, the more the air vibrated, not with hostility, but with a strange rhythmic hum that resonated deep within their chests. It was as though the building itself breathed, exuding an energy that made the soldiers exchange uneasy glances. Yet, despite the otherworldly aura surrounding them, there was something oddly serene about the scene. No alarms blared, no swarms of alien drones descended upon them. Just silence, broken only by the soft whispers of wind weaving through the alien spires. Elias signaled for his squad to halt, raising a gloved hand as he scanned the area. His instincts screamed at him to proceed with caution, yet part of him hesitated. Why hadn't they encountered resistance yet? Every mission brief painted this place as a fortress teeming with activity, guarded fiercely by waves of lethal creatures ready to tear intruders apart. But here they stood, unchallenged, staring up at the entrance like voyagers unsure whether to step into forbidden territory. "This feels wrong," murmured Jenkins, one of the younger recruits, his voice barely audible over the hum. Elias nodded silently, his jaw tightening. Wrong didn't begin to cover it. They pressed onward, stepping carefully into the shadowy interior of the structure. Inside, the walls glistened with a slick, organic texture, as if the entire edifice were crafted from living tissue. Faint veins of light pulsed along the surfaces, guiding them deeper into the labyrinthine corridors. The air grew warmer, almost humid, and carried a faint scent, earthy, metallic, and strangely comforting. It was disorienting, almost hypnotic, and Elias caught himself slowing down to take it all in. The further they ventured, the less fortified the place seemed. No traps, no ambushes, no signs of life except for the gentle glow of the walls and the rhythmic thrumming that now felt less like a threat and more like a heartbeat. Then came the sound, a soft rustling, like leaves brushing against each other in a breeze, followed by the faintest whisper of movement. Every soldier froze, weapons snapping to attention as they scanned the darkness ahead. But instead of the snarling beasts they expected, a figure emerged slowly from the shadows. It was small, delicate even, with translucent skin that shimmered faintly under the ambient light. Its movements were fluid, almost graceful, and its wide, luminous eyes locked onto Elias with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. It didn't attack. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, studying them curiously, as if trying to understand why they were there. "Hold your fire," Elias barked, though his own weapon remained poised. The creature took another hesitant step forward, then stopped, extending a slender arm toward them. In its hand was what looked like a fragment of glowing crystal, pulsing softly in time with the walls around them. For a moment, no one moved. Then, without warning, the creature dropped the object at their feet and retreated back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. "What the hell was that?" someone whispered behind him, breaking the spell. Elias knelt cautiously, examining the crystal. It radiated warmth, and when he touched it, a surge of calm washed over him, a sensation so foreign amidst the chaos of war that it startled him. Rising to his feet, he turned to his team, his expression unreadable. "We keep moving," he said firmly, though doubt gnawed at him. This wasn't what they'd been told to expect. This wasn't danger. It was curiosity. The deeper they ventured, the more questions arose. Were they walking into a trap? Or had they misunderstood everything about this place, and its queen, from the start? As Elias led his team further into the alien stronghold, the weight of uncertainty pressed harder on his mind. Each corridor they traversed seemed less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary, bathed in soft, pulsating light that cast shifting patterns on the walls. The absence of hostility gnawed at him, leaving room for thoughts he'd long suppressed. What if the Queen wasn't the monster Command had described? What if this entire mission was built on lies spun to justify aggression? He clenched his jaw, shaking off the doubts before they could take root. Soldiers weren't meant to question orders, they were meant to follow them. Still, the unease lingered. The group rounded a corner, entering a vast chamber that stretched higher than any cathedral Elias had ever seen. At its center stood a massive crystalline structure, glowing faintly with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with the walls. Surrounding it were smaller figures, aliens similar to the one they'd encountered earlier, their forms lithe and ethereal. They moved with purpose, tending to the structure as though it were alive, their actions precise yet tender. It was impossible not to notice the harmony in their movements, a stark contrast to the brutality Elias had envisioned. His grip on his weapon loosened slightly, though he kept it raised, scanning the room for threats. And then he saw her. Perched atop the crystalline formation, the alien queen commanded attention without effort. She was immense, her body sleek and powerful, radiating an aura of quiet authority. Her elongated limbs ended in claw-like appendages, glinting faintly in the soft light, but her presence wasn't menacing, it was regal. Her gaze swept over the intruders, piercing yet curious, as though she were sizing them up not as enemies but as anomalies. For a moment, Elias forgot how to breathe. This wasn't the rabid tyrant from the mission briefs. This was something else entirely, a being whose power emanated not from violence but from sheer existence. "She doesn't look dangerous," muttered Jenkins, voicing what everyone was thinking. "That's because you're not listening," Elias shot back, his voice low but firm. He could feel it now, the subtle hum in the air growing stronger, resonating in his chest like a second heartbeat. It wasn't hostile, but it demanded respect. The Queen tilted her head slightly, her luminous eyes locking onto Elias. There was intelligence there, ancient and profound, layered with emotions he couldn't begin to decipher. Fear? No, not quite. Caution? Perhaps. But beneath it all lay something softer, almost vulnerable. One of the smaller aliens stepped forward, placing itself between the humans and the Queen. It raised a delicate arm, gesturing toward the glowing structure behind her. The message was clear: stay back. Yet, despite the implied warning, there was no malice in its posture. It wasn't barring them out of hatred or fear, it was protecting something precious. Elias lowered his weapon slightly, earning a sharp glance from his second-in-command. He ignored it, focusing instead on the Queen. She hadn't moved since they entered, her gaze unwavering, her body coiled loosely but ready. Ready for what, though? An attack? Or perhaps, communication? The realization struck him like a thunderclap. If she truly wanted them dead, they wouldn't have made it this far. Everything about this encounter suggested restraint, not aggression. And yet, Command's warnings echoed in his ears, drowning out his instincts. "Stay sharp," he ordered quietly, though his tone lacked conviction. Part of him, a small, rebellious part, wanted to believe the impossible. That maybe, just maybe, the Queen wasn't their enemy at all. The standoff stretched on, moments ticking by like hours. Finally, the Queen shifted, unfolding her massive form with deliberate slowness. She descended from her perch, her movements calculated yet graceful, as if aware of the impact her every action had on the fragile balance of the situation. When she reached the base of the crystalline structure, she paused, inclining her head slightly toward Elias. It wasn't a bow or a challenge, it was acknowledgement. Recognition. As if she understood who he was, even if he barely understood himself. Elias swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. Whatever she wanted, whatever she intended, he knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be simple again. The stillness shattered when one of the soldiers, Martinez, spoke too loudly, his voice cracking through the tense silence like a whip. "What are we waiting for? She's right there." His finger twitched near the trigger of his weapon, and Elias immediately snapped his head around, glaring daggers at him. "Stand down," he growled, his voice cutting through the air with authority. But the damage was done. The Queen's demeanor shifted subtly, her previously calm gaze sharpened, and a low, resonant vibration began to emanate from her body. It wasn't a growl, it was deeper, richer, almost musical, but it carried unmistakable intent. The smaller aliens surrounding her reacted instantly, forming a protective barrier between her and the intruders, their once curious expressions replaced by wary determination. Elias raised a hand, signaling for patience, but Martinez wasn't finished. "She's messing with us," he spat, his fear morphing into anger. "We should have taken her out already." Before anyone could stop him, he fired a single bolt from his plasma rifle, aiming not at the Queen herself but at the glowing crystalline structure behind her. The shot hit its mark with a deafening crack, sending shards of light cascading outward like fractured stars. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The Queen let out a piercing shriek that reverberated through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the fortress. Her protectors surged forward, their movements swift and coordinated, forcing the humans to scramble backward in panic. "No! Hold your fire!" Elias shouted, his voice drowned out by the chaos. The soldiers opened fire instinctively, their weapons lighting up the cavernous space with bursts of energy. The Queen reared back, her massive form coiling defensively, but she didn't retaliate. Instead, she emitted another wave of vibrations, this time louder and more insistent, as if trying to communicate over the din of battle. One of the smaller aliens darted toward the crystalline structure, frantically gathering fragments of the damaged core. Its actions were frantic yet purposeful, underscoring the importance of what Martinez had destroyed. Amidst the confusion, Elias lunged forward, grabbing Martinez by the collar and yanking him back. "You idiot! What have you done?" he roared, shoving the man aside before turning his attention to the Queen. Her eyes locked onto his, filled with a mixture of fury and sorrow that struck him like a physical blow. She wasn't attacking them, not yet, but the betrayal in her gaze was palpable. Elias realized then that the structure wasn't just decoration, it was central to her world, perhaps even vital to her survival. And now it was broken. The fighting subsided as quickly as it had begun, leaving the chamber eerily silent except for the hum of the remaining crystals. The Queen's protectors retreated slightly, forming a loose circle around her, their bodies tense but not aggressive. She lowered herself slowly, her claws scraping lightly against the ground as she extended one limb toward the damaged structure. Her touch seemed to soothe it, the cracks beginning to mend themselves as faint light flickered back to life. Watching her, Elias felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly brought him to his knees. This wasn't a monster defending her throne, it was a guardian mourning the violation of something sacred. "We need to fix this," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for his team to hear. Jenkins frowned, lowering his weapon cautiously. "Fix what? We can't undo what's been done." Elias shook his head, his mind racing. "No, but we can try to make it right. Stand down. All of you." He turned fully toward the Queen, raising both hands in a gesture of surrender. "Please," he said aloud, knowing she might not understand his words but hoping she'd grasp the sincerity behind them. "We didn't mean to hurt you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the queen rose again, her movements slower this time, deliberate. She stepped closer, her massive form looming over Elias, who forced himself to remain still despite every instinct screaming at him to run. Her eyes bore into his, searching, assessing. And then, unexpectedly, she extended one clawed hand toward him, not in attack, but in offering. A fragment of the shattered crystal rested in her palm, glowing faintly as if beckoning him to take it. Elias hesitated, glancing back at his team. They were frozen, weapons lowered but ready, their expressions a mix of disbelief and apprehension. Taking a deep breath, he reached out, his fingers brushing against hers as he accepted the shard. The instant he touched it, a surge of warmth flooded through him, accompanied by a flood of sensations he couldn't comprehend, images of vast landscapes, intricate networks of life, and a deep, resonant connection to something greater than himself. Tears welled in his eyes as he stumbled backward, overwhelmed. The queen watched him closely, her expression unreadable. Then, with a final, mournful hum, she turned and moved back toward the crystalline structure, her protectors following in her wake. The humans stood there, stunned, as the chamber began to dim, the lights fading until only the faint glow of the repaired core remained. Whatever peace they had briefly glimpsed was gone, replaced by an uneasy truce, and the haunting knowledge that they had crossed a line they might never fully understand. Elias tightened his grip on the shard, its warmth seeping into his palm like a promise, or a warning. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain: the queen wasn't done with them. The shard in Elias' hand pulsed with an almost imperceptible rhythm, its glow faint but persistent, as if urging him to move. He stared at it, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The queen's gesture had been deliberate, meaningful. She wasn't rejecting them outright, but neither was she forgiving. Whatever this fragment represented, it was a thread connecting two worlds that should never have collided. And now, it fell to him to unravel its significance. "We need to find out what this is," he said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "It's not just a piece of crystal. It's alive." Jenkins stepped closer, peering at the shard with cautious curiosity. "You think she gave it to you for a reason?" he asked, his tone hushed, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile piece they'd stumbled upon. Elias nodded slowly. "I don't know what she wants from us, but I do know this: we messed up. Badly. If we walk away now, we're no better than the monsters they warned us about." His words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, the group fell silent, each soldier grappling with the weight of their actions. Martinez shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado replaced by shame. "So what do we do? Go crawling back to her and hope she doesn't rip us apart?" His voice carried a note of defiance, but it wavered, betraying his fear. Elias turned to face him, his expression grim. "If that's what it takes, then yes. We owe her that much. But first, we figure out what this thing is and why she trusted me with it." He held up the shard, letting its light catch the dim glow of the chamber. "Maybe it'll tell us something. Maybe it's a key." Without waiting for further debate, Elias motioned for the team to follow him. They retraced their steps through the winding corridors, the oppressive stillness of the alien fortress pressing down on them once more. The journey back felt longer this time, the weight of their failure dragging at their heels. As they neared the entrance, Elias paused, scanning the area. The landscape outside was unchanged, barren, desolate, and eerily beautiful, but something about it felt different now. The fortress itself seemed quieter, almost subdued, as if the queen's grief had permeated its very essence. "Set up camp here," Elias instructed, pointing to a cluster of jagged rocks that offered some semblance of cover. "We'll take shifts keeping watch, but no one goes anywhere alone." "Understood." The soldiers nodded, their faces drawn with exhaustion and unease. While they worked to establish their temporary base, Elias sat cross-legged on the ground, cradling the shard in both hands. He studied it intently, turning it over and over, searching for clues. Its surface was smooth yet textured, like liquid glass frozen mid-flow. Tiny veins of light branched across it, pulsing gently in sync with his heartbeat, or perhaps the fortress's. He couldn't tell anymore. Hours passed, and the others drifted off to rest, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts. The shard continued to glow softly, casting faint shadows on the rocky terrain. He closed his eyes, focusing on the warmth it radiated, trying to will himself to understand. Images flickered at the edges of his consciousness, fragments of memories that weren't his own. Vast forests of crystalline trees swaying in an unseen breeze. Rivers of light flowing endlessly beneath starlit skies. A choir of voices singing in harmonies too complex for human ears to comprehend. And always, the queen at the center of it all, her presence both commanding and tender. When Elias opened his eyes again, dawn was breaking, painting the alien horizon in hues of gold and crimson. The shard's glow had dimmed slightly, but its warmth remained constant, a reminder of the responsibility resting in his hands. He stood, stretching stiff muscles, and surveyed the sleeping forms of his team. They looked so small against the vast emptiness of the planet, their armor dull under the rising suns. Yet, somehow, they carried the fate of two species on their weary shoulders. Elias knelt beside Jenkins, shaking him awake gently. "Get everyone up," he said quietly. "We're going back inside." Jenkins blinked groggily, rubbing his eyes. "Back in there? Are you serious?" Elias nodded, his resolve unwavering. "We started this mess. We finish it." Jenkins hesitated, then sighed and pushed himself to his feet. "All right. But if she decides to squash us like bugs, don't say I didn't warn you." As the team gathered, Elias explained his plan, or rather, his lack of one. "We go back to the chamber. We show her we're willing to listen. That's all we can do right now." His voice carried a quiet determination, and though none of them looked particularly thrilled about returning to the Queen's domain, they nodded in agreement. They owed her that much, at least. With the shard tucked securely into a pouch on his belt, Elias led the way back into the fortress. The familiar hum greeted them as they entered, though it felt subdued, almost mournful. The corridors were empty, the smaller aliens nowhere to be seen. The absence of their watchful eyes made the journey feel lonelier, more precarious. When they reached the chamber, the Queen was waiting. She stood tall and unmoving, her gaze fixed on Elias as he stepped forward. Behind him, the others fanned out cautiously, weapons at the ready but lowered. Elias removed the shard from his pouch and held it out toward her, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't know if you understand me," he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But I'm sorry. For everything." The Queen regarded him silently, her luminous eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, she extended one clawed hand, hovering it above the shard without touching it. A soft hum filled the chamber, resonating with the shard's pulse until the two rhythms merged into one. The light intensified, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. And then, something extraordinary happened. The Queen lowered her hand, brushing it lightly against Elias' shoulder in a gesture so unexpected it left him breathless. It wasn't an attack, it wasn't even defensive. It was intimate, personal. For a fleeting moment, Elias felt a connection unlike anything he'd ever experienced, as if the boundaries between them had dissolved. He staggered back, clutching the shard tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. The Queen straightened, her expression unreadable once more. Then, with a final piercing gaze, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, her protectors trailing after her. The chamber fell silent, the glow fading until only the faint hum of the fortress remained. Elias stood there, rooted to the spot, his mind racing. Whatever had just transpired, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The shard in Elias' possession began to emit a faint, rhythmic vibration, pulsing in a pattern that mirrored the rise and fall of his own breathing. It was as if the fragment had become attuned to him, forging a connection that transcended language or logic. He stared at it, transfixed, as the implications of its behavior settled over him. This wasn't merely a relic or a tool, it was alive, sentient, and somehow aware of his presence. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. If the shard could resonate with him, what else could it do? Could it bridge the gap between human and alien, allowing them to communicate where words failed? Or was it something darker, a tether binding him to forces he couldn't begin to comprehend? Elias glanced at his team, who were watching him with a mixture of awe and unease. They hadn't witnessed the full extent of the shard's reaction, but they'd seen enough to understand that something profound was happening. Jenkins broke the silence first, his voice hesitant. "What does it mean, sir? What's it doing?" Elias shook his head, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know. But I think it's trying to tell us something." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "We need to go deeper. Back into the fortress. See if we can find answers." The suggestion was met with murmurs of dissent, but no one outright refused. They'd come too far, risked too much, to turn back now. Gathering their gear, they set off once more, retracing their steps through the labyrinthine corridors. This time, however, the fortress seemed different. The walls pulsed brighter, their bioluminescent veins throbbing in sync with the shard's rhythm. The air grew warmer, heavier, charged with an energy that prickled against their skin. It was as though the structure itself was responding to the shard's presence, guiding them forward. As they ventured deeper, the passages began to narrow, twisting into tight, serpentine tunnels that forced them to move single file. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, reverberating in their bones. Elias led the way, clutching the shard tightly, its light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He felt a strange pull, an inexplicable certainty that they were heading in the right direction. The shard seemed to guide him, its vibrations intensifying whenever he hesitated at a fork in the path. It was unnerving, yet exhilarating, as if he were part of something far greater than himself. Finally, they emerged into a new chamber, smaller than the one housing the crystalline structure but no less breathtaking. The walls were lined with clusters of glowing orbs, each pulsing with a unique frequency. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface etched with intricate patterns that shimmered faintly under the orb's light. The shard in Elias' hand flared brightly, its glow matching the rhythm of the orbs. Without hesitation, he approached the pedestal and placed the shard onto its surface. The moment it made contact, the entire chamber erupted in a symphony of light and sound. The orbs began to spin, their frequencies merging into a harmonious resonance that filled the space. Images flickered across the walls, scenes of alien landscapes, towering cities made of crystal, and vast networks of interconnected life forms. Elias and his team watched in stunned silence as the visions unfolded, revealing glimpses of a civilization vastly different from their own. There were moments of beauty and wonder, but also of sorrow and loss. Entire ecosystems collapsing. Wars fought not for conquest, but for survival. And through it all, the Queen stood as a guardian, her role both revered and tragic. Then, abruptly, the images shifted. Human faces appeared, faces of generals, scientists, politicians. Voices overlapped, distorted yet intelligible, recounting plans and strategies. Words like extermination, resource extraction, and invasion echoed through the chamber, sending a chill through the soldiers. These weren't the fragmented accounts of alien history. They were records of humanity's intentions. Records of betrayal. Elias staggered back, his mind reeling. The shard had shown them the truth. The Queen and her people weren't aggressors, they were victims. Humanity had come not as explorers or diplomats, but as conquerors, driven by greed and fear. The realization hit him like a physical blow, leaving him breathless. Beside him, Jenkins whispered, "We lied to ourselves. All of us." His voice cracked, heavy with guilt. Martinez sank to his knees, his face pale. "What have we done?" Before anyone could respond, the pedestal emitted a final, blinding flash. When the light faded, the shard was gone, absorbed into the structure. The orbs dimmed, their spinning slowing until they came to a halt. The chamber fell silent, save for the faint hum of the fortress. Elias turned to his team, his expression grim. "We need to get back to command. Now." His voice was firm, resolute. "They need to see this. To understand." But as they retraced their steps, the fortress seemed to resist their departure. The walls darkened, the hum fading into an ominous silence. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the air grew colder, heavier. It was as though the structure itself was reluctant to let them leave, as if it sensed their burden and feared they might falter. Elias pressed on, his jaw clenched, his determination unyielding. They had uncovered the truth, and now they carried its weight. Whatever consequences awaited them, they would face them together. The journey back to the surface felt endless, each step heavier than the last. The fortress no longer hummed with life. Instead, it exuded a somber stillness, as if mourning the revelations forced into the open. By the time they emerged into the harsh daylight of the alien planet, Elias' resolve had hardened into something unshakable. The shard's absence left a hollow ache in his chest, but its lessons burned bright within him. He turned to his team, their faces etched with exhaustion and guilt, and spoke with quiet authority. "We can't undo what's been done, but we can change what happens next. We owe them that much." The trek back to their dropship was a blur of dust and despair. None of them spoke, the weight of their discovery pressing down like the twin suns overhead. When they finally reached the vessel, its sleek metallic frame gleaming dully against the desolate backdrop, Elias paused, taking one last look at the fortress. It loomed in the distance, silent and stoic, a monument to a civilization betrayed. He clenched his fists, vowing silently to honor the trust the Queen had placed in him, however unintentionally. With a nod to his team, they boarded the ship, the engines roaring to life as they lifted off. Command's response would not be kind. Elias knew that. He could already picture the cold stares, the dismissive tones, the attempts to bury the truth beneath layers of bureaucracy and denial. But he also knew that he wouldn't, let them succeed. As the dropship hurtled through the void, carrying them back toward Earth, Elias replayed the images in his mind. The Queen's sorrowful gaze, the devastated landscapes, the damning evidence of humanity's intentions. He thought of the shard, its warmth now a memory, and wondered if it had chosen him for a reason. Had it sought someone willing to listen, to bear witness? Or had it simply needed a conduit, a flawed but determined human to carry its message? Jenkins broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think they'll believe us, sir?" Elias didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, tinged with both hope and resignation. "It doesn't matter if they believe us. What matters is that we tell them. That we make them see." He glanced at Martinez, who sat hunched in his seat, staring blankly at the floor. "And when they try to shut us down, we fight back. Because this isn't just about us anymore. It's about her. About them." The dropship shuddered slightly as it entered the atmosphere of their home planet, the blue-green orb growing larger in the viewport. Elias felt a pang of unease. Earth looked peaceful from here, untouched by the horrors they'd uncovered. Yet beneath its serene surface lay the machinations of power, ambition, and fear, the very forces that had brought them to this point. As the ship descended, Elias steeled himself for the battles ahead. The Queen had shown them mercy, had reached out despite everything. Now it was their turn to prove worthy of that gesture. When the hatch opened, revealing the sterile brightness of the landing bay, Elias stepped out first, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. His team followed, their faces masks of determination. They would deliver the truth, no matter the cost. Because somewhere, far away, a queen waited, not for vengeance, but for understanding. And Elias intended to give her exactly that. As they marched into Command's headquarters, Elias carried the weight of the shard's revelations like an invisible mantle. The sterile corridors and cold stares of superior officers did little to deter him. When confronted by General Harlow, a grizzled man whose voice dripped with skepticism, Elias didn't flinch. "You sent us to destroy something you didn't understand," he said, his tone unyielding. "But what if I told you she wasn't our enemy? What if I told you we are the invaders?" Harlow scoffed, dismissing the account as stress-induced delusion. But Elias pressed on, recounting every detail: the fortress, the visions, the Queen's quiet plea for understanding. His team stood beside him, their faces resolute, united in purpose. Though no one believed them at first, the sheer conviction in their voices began to sow doubt. Days turned into weeks as Elias fought tirelessly, presenting fragments of evidence salvaged from their mission. Slowly, cracks formed in Command's resolve. Allies emerged, scientists, diplomats, even soldiers who had once blindly followed orders, each drawn to the truth Elias championed. Together, they built a fragile coalition determined to rewrite humanity's course. In time, a delegation was formed, tasked with returning to the alien world, not with weapons, but with open hands. When they arrived, the fortress greeted them not with hostility, but cautious curiosity. The queen appeared once more, her gaze piercing yet hopeful. This time, there were no misunderstandings, no violence. Only words, halting, imperfect, but sincere, exchanged between two species teetering on the brink of either war or peace. Elias stepped forward, bowing deeply before her. "We came here to harm you," he admitted, his voice steady. "But we leave here humbled. Teach us how to make amends." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, slowly, the queen extended a clawed hand, brushing it lightly against his shoulder, a gesture mirrored from their last encounter. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a beginning. As the humans departed, the fortress pulsed softly behind them, its light brighter than before. Elias looked back one final time, meeting the queen's luminous eyes. In that moment, he knew, though scars remained, hope had taken root. And sometimes, all it takes is a single step toward understanding to change the fate of worlds.